Va muy bien.
Sí, y tal. Y ahora mismo tengo una entrevista.
Sí, hacemos eso. Va muy bien.
Sí, y tal. Y ahora mismo tengo una entrevista.
Sí, hacemos eso. Va muy bien.
Sí, y tal. Y ahora mismo tengo una entrevista.
Sí, hacemos eso.
Good morning, and thank you very much for being with us. I suppose you'll be surprised with what you've just watched, because this is what we have discovered. Fetus, when they hear music, react and wake up and move their mouths and tongues. There are vocalizing movements. But to achieve this, the only way for the sound to reach them, for them to listen to as we do, is via the vagina. Institut Marquès is carrying out an important line of research on the effects of music at the beginning of life, about the influence of music in the development and embryo and fetal development. We have improved fertilization in vitro, applying musical vibrations in embryo incubators. We realized that if we put loudspeakers on the abdomen of pregnant women at a very high intensity, there was no reaction, and the fetus carried on sleeping. And we thought that they didn't listen to it, they didn't hear it. It's not the same thinking that they can't see because the light doesn't reach them, and in the same way they can't hear because the sound doesn't reach them. So we had to put background music to the uterus and do it to the vagina and bellies of our pregnant women's. With this, I achieved for them to laugh, and we had an IT man who designed a small device that was put in the vagina and was connected to an external sound connection. This was our first prototype. The first scan was carried out by a biologist. Our pregnant woman was 6 months pregnant. The fetus was asleep. We played Spanish guitar, and the fetus started to move its mouth and its tongue. And it looked like he wanted to start speaking or singing as Paco de Lucia carried on playing. What did this mean? What does it mean? We had to start a scientific study about this response, find out what was the first time it happened, what was it caused by, and also what neurons were activated. Why was there such a difference between the abdominal or vaginal way? We got in touch with OTR specialists, neurologists, gynecologists, sound technicians, but nobody could help us. But OTR physicians, and we have to thank the director of the hospital clinic, told us that he couldn't hurt the fetal ear, and gynecologists explained to the ethics committee who approved of this study that this study wasn't going to cause any harm. We couldn't take any risk because there was nothing known about this. Honestly, I am saying this, but I'm saying that because what we're going to be talking about and explaining to you was unknown in the world of medicine and is the product of many years of research. anthropology studies, music studies, and all sorts of topic studies. What do we think is heard in the uterus? The fetus receives sounds from the body of its mother, from the heartbeat, breathing sounds from the bowel movements, also sounds from when she talks, when she speaks, and everything that she hears on the outside. But the fetus lives in a totally soundproof environment. He's isolated from the sounds. You've brought that image on the screen. I thought that was coming later. If you'll allow me a second, please excuse me. I apologize. I apologize. From the abdomen, one part of the sound is reflected outside and the other is absorbed. The hard surfaces absorb it and the soft surfaces take it in. So what you see on these abdominal walls get the sound in and get it distorted with less intensity and less clarity. There are studies in sheep with intrauterine microphones that they hear 30 decibels, almost like a whisper, and also almost 50% of the words get distorted. Only half of them are understandable, and there's a change in tone and timbre. And also when we listen someone speaking in the next room, although we can hear it, we don't understand it well. We think, we agree with Tomatis, and that's what he says, that the sound environment of a uterus is like the background sound of a forest. The fetus is adapted and accustomed to those sounds, and for the fetus to listen to the same sounds as we do is via the vagina. As you can see, the vagina is enclosed space. Also, the layers of the soft tissue separating the fetus from the outside is less. It's only the uterine and abdominal walls. If we place a loudspeaker on the vagina, the fetus can almost hear it with the same intensity. So this device developed for this study was, without meaning to, the formula for the fetus to get the sound in an effective manner without distortions. One part of our work with the study and the development of the fetus is the response to the music via the vagina. Those that have signed the study are Professor Prats Galindo, Professor at the Neuroanatomy and Embryology of the Hospital Clinic of Barcelona, myself, Marisa Lopez Tejon, and Dr. Alex Garcia Fauro. In June 2014, once we finished all the preliminary studies helping us to decide what parameters we were going to use in the study, we started a prospective double-blind study to establish whether this such a strong response that had stimulated us during the last months was caused by a fetal audition response. We had two main targets. The first one was to determine via fetal 2,4D scans we could determine this opening of the mouth and salivating protrusion of the tongue movements within gaps of 5 minutes. First, it was after 5 minutes rest when a scan was done, then one scan during the stimulation and one final scan when these testing was finished. Also, we wanted to compare with 3 distinct groups the response, the fetal response, according to the type of stimuli applied. So 3 groups. One was music via the abdomen, with using headphones also in the lower part of the abdomen, with an emission of music at almost 100 decibels, sound similar to that of a train. The second group would be vibration via the vagina, with a sexual vibrator with an intensity of almost 70 decibels, corresponding to the intensity of quite a loud conversation. And finally, the group with music via the vagina, using this device, which we finally called baby pod, and which is the result of the development of the old prototypes that we had been using during the preliminary study, and that enabled us to emit music from the vagina at a 54 decibel level, similar to that of a normal tone conversation. The music that we used was a flute monody, the Partita in A minor by Bach, and we also established secondary targets, which were to evaluate other parameters of the fetal response, such as the heart rate, the changes in the cerebral circulation, and other signs of fetal activation, such as moving the extremities, moving its head, bearing in mind that we were just studying the face of the fetus and not the fetus as a whole. In a 3-month period, we were surprised, and we could evaluate 106 patients, and we really didn't feel any incidents, no adverse effects when using neither of the 3 devices during the study. And also we were surprised by the emotion and response of the parents during the scans, also the same as we reacted when doing the trials and seeing those face, mouth and tongue movements. In that sense, we were able to recruit 1,000 patients over a period of 1 year. For all other studies that were ongoing for fetal audition studies, which were being held parallel. First, we studied the fetal response during rest, when there was no stimuli, to make sure that all groups were homogeneous, they were the same, and during that resting time were comparable. During that study, we didn't notice any differences. 30% of the fetus had spontaneous movements of the mouth, and 10% of the fetus were sticking their tongues out in a spontaneous manner. There were no great differences. The results concord with what has been published, the literature that has been published, and comparable to while being in rest. When using music via the vagina, we noticed that there was a huge increase of the fetal activity. 90% of the fetus became active, and almost 87% of opening movements. That means opening the mouth, even pulling the jaws apart, and 50% during the stimuli were protruding the tongue, sticking their tongues out. Once we finished the stimuli, there was a low drop of such specific movements, but they were quite significant for statistics. The difference with the group using music via abdominal, there were no great relevant differences, and the mouth and protruding the tongue movements didn't have many significant changes. The same occurred with the vibration via the vagina, and none of the specific movements changed statistically during the 3 periods, the 3 times of the test. If comparing the 3 groups, we can see that the only group that increased the specific mouth and tongue movements was the one using music via the vagina, not only because of the times, but also the times they were sticking their tongues out during that lapse of 5-minute time. And on average, they were sticking their tongues out 5 to 10 times, even at times 10, 15, 18 times during a 5-minute period time. I suppose, as you saw on the video, that's quite a lot. If comparing the groups according to weeks of pregnancy and fetus with which are less than 16 weeks pregnancy and over, and 26, there's an increase in movements, and this increase occurs with the group that's over 16 weeks pregnant, whereas with the rest there were no significant differences. As gestation continues, the increase of response is more and more significant, especially so during the last quarter of the pregnancy. Once we analyzed all results and we checked the literature, we reached the following conclusions: that music via the vagina provokes a fetal response with specific movements of opening the mouth and protrusion of the tongue. These are quite unusual movements, and it's unusual to see them during the scans. They don't occur when vibration is applied via the vagina and at a higher rate. And the only way to activate this hearing auditory response is via the vagina with a device, which doesn't occur via the abdomen. We noticed that this occurred during the 26th week of pregnancy, and it increases in a significant manner as gestation continues. Structurally speaking, in the 16th week, the ear of the fetus is complete, but as from that week, as from week 16, we can see it's functioning, not as week 26 as was thought before. We realized that the response with the fetus was the same for both genders. And having reached that point, we thankfully could count on the help of Professor Prats, who will explain the hypothesis to why this movement occurs and why such a primitive movement at such an early stage of 16 weeks occurs, and why this changes during gestation. Professor, good morning. The hypothesis that this team has established lead us to think that music induces vocalization movements because it activates circuits that are linked to communication and language. Once the ear has been formed, as per week 16, the auditive systems, according to their rhythm and melody, are going to be able to activate primitive circuits that are part of the brain stem, that is in the nervous system that is below the brain, which is more primitive, less complex, and it implies centers that are located in the periaqueductal gray substance and that are related to social conduct. These circuits will be the ones that promote vocalization movements. This is located within the center of the brainstem, and the fetus will be able to detect whether it's a harmonic or dissonant sound. If it is harmonic, it would activate centers that are going to in turn activate cranial nerves, basically the trigeminal, hypoglossal, etc., responsible for movements of the mouth, of the tongue, of the lips, and movements that we interpret as for vocalization and that are prior to language. We know that babies are going to be able to respond to vocalization movements when faced to specific sounds. That will be the initial part of speaking. So dissonant sounds are not going to activate such circuits in the brainstem and would be inadequate to stimulate speech, whereas human speech and music are going to be able to activate. The responses that we've observed are going to be different according to each examination and are going to vary according to the time that each fetus is going to take to react from the moment of stimuli via the vagina and the beginning of that response. They're also different as per the motions and their intensity, and also even the time that these movements remain, although the device has been turned off. So they're going to be responses that are specific to the fetus according to the different phases. It's not, therefore, going to be a reflex like the Rotulian reflex. When we pull out on the tendon, the knee is always going to be reacting the same manner. This response is going to depend on multiple factors, possibly indicative of the degree of functionality of the brainstem. Also, we're going to respect the sleep patterns. The same occurs with babies that when sung to or spoken to don't always react the same way. This response is going to be the same as depending on sleep. Why don't they have the same reaction when using a vibrator via the vagina? It was quite outstanding to see the type of response to the vibrations. Although the intensity was greater than that of the musical stimuli, we believe that music applied in the way we have done is going to have a harmonic organization of the sound, whereas sounds in themselves are dissonant. In the Institute, when using high-pitched whistles at 54 decibels, showed a different type of reaction. Therefore, we can say the fetus is reacting when faced to stimuli. In other words, the fetus is not going to have a response in front of vibrations or sounds, but it will do so with music. We are probably all asking ourselves if these fetus feel pleasure like adults when listening to music. This is a question with quite a complex answer, because the system that controls the pleasure in the brain is made up of different structures interconnected among themselves. We have no evidence that such centers are formed in week 16. Among these centers is especially important the accumbens nucleus. We don't know if it's active at that time, and it will probably be active as from week 26. We'll get rid of our doubts, when we finish this study that we are carrying out with the different institutions, Institut Marquès, the anatomy faculty of the University of Barcelona, and also radiology department of the Hospital Clinic of Barcelona. And we are carrying out these MRI, functional MRI studies to see if such stimuli activate in children as who are 3 weeks old, having been born, experiment, feel pleasure. I'll pass the floor on later to Dr. Marisa Lopez. Before we do so, I can tell you that the response is different according to the type of music. We don't know why. We've been doing this for months with over 1,000 patients, and our research is ongoing. What we do know is that the response, in accordance to the response with movements of mouth, protrusion of the tongue, etc., depends on music. We don't know if it's because of African tam-tams or if it's an a cappella singing. We don't know. We have an agreement with Universal to carry out our research, to use their catalog, and we are able to use their sounds, and their sound technicians do the fragmentation of those sounds. Last week, when we were preparing this presentation, when using Manuel Poveda, there was 100% response with protrusion of the tongue. And perhaps it's because of Cante Hondo from Andalusia, but also we are informing of the musics that most stimulate babies, and this company then makes up the list of music to be used in the baby pod. I would like to thank the president of Universal, who is here today, and from the first moment got very excited about this project, Antoni Peret, who is part of our team, and also our musicologist and professor of music, who is part of our music team. With Serenata K25 of Mozart, there was a higher response than with Bach's. Well, I feel that perhaps you would think that the flute is boring, but okay, so let's not use Bach, let's use something else. But with the K525 of Mozart, we had 91% of the fetus response, and 73% do produce their tongues. You're probably wondering, but what is happening? What is occurring? We have used the voice of the mother, of the father, of other brothers and sisters. There is no difference in the response. But when there is music, the fetus awakes, and in 75% of the fetus, there's movements of the mouth, but no protrusion of the tongue. We believe these are due to cerebral circuits. Perhaps according to the stimuli we do receive ourselves, we will react or be activated in a different way. But what did attract our attention is when using the voice of Mickey Mouse.
¿Quieren que les muestre lo que le gusta a Delphi? Pues adelante, vamos.
With Mickey Mouse, you can see that 15% of cases with protrusion of the tongue, because there's musicality in the voice, and that's the way we speak to them. We don't speak to them in a low key, but we speak to them in a high-pitched, higher, and we give it a melody. That's the way we speak to babies. And the way they respond, of course, differs. And, of course, it's different according to the activity that the neurons that are taking part in that activity are doing at that time. As our conclusions, let's do a sum up. we have discovered the formula for fetus to hear like us, and so that the sound reaches them in an efficient manner. This is using music through the vagina of the mother. Also, when putting music through the vagina, fetus wake up, move their mouths and tongue, and do vocalization movements. For the first time, we have achieved in communicating with the fetus. Also, this study shows that the fetus hears from week 16. The fetus is in a soundproof environment. He almost doesn't hear the voice of his mother. It's almost perceived as a whisper. And we can discard fetal deafness. If he responds to music, this means he's not deaf. And people with deafness do perceive vibrations but not music. Our hypothesis is that music activates cerebral circuits that are primitive and implied in communication and language. What medical applications can be pulled out? Better efficiency and faster scans, because fetal movements enables the technicians to see the structures easily. It also enables the pregnant woman to check that the fetus is fine. When feeling anxious, she can also activate movements in her baby. It's a unique experience for the parents and their future son. Together they can share the benefits of music with the grandmother, the children, etc. That's the way to speak to them. It's the way we have to communicate with the fetus and stimulate them neurologically. Music stimulates learning of language. How do we learn our tables? This way. And the learning can start in the uterus. Lastly, this shows a very passionate and interesting line of scientific investigation, research, pre- and postnatal, that is totally a first.
Yo siento manifestarme de una forma tan desagradable con esto.
I am sorry to say it in such a nasty way, but I'm afraid that if the fetus is always in a soundproof environment, perhaps this is what the baby needs. What we advise is that we apply the music or speak to the fetus the same as when he's born. Not all the time. He needs its sleeping cycles. 10-20 minutes in the morning, 10-20 minutes at night. It could be more, but we had to establish a pattern. Basically, not to interrupt its sleep patterns with music or with speaking to them. When my children were little, if someone spoke to them, this person would wake them up. A different question? I wanted to know regarding the baby pod. Is it a patented product by yourselves, and can you foresee that people will be able to buy it or use it? How do you approach this? The patent of baby pod was done by Luis Pallares, signed by himself and myself. And after that, it slipped our hands, and electronics company that is here, Olivier, decided to make the device, make it different. They thought that pregnant women could benefit from that. They have distributed, and it's called Baby Pod. We are highly satisfied that not only can pregnant women can use that, but also it's beneficial for everybody. It can be bought, and it's called Baby Pod. Baby Pod is not as a healthcare product. Is a normal consumer product, such a dildo. Of course, it's not to be used in girls or women with vagina infections or with risks of premature births. This device has been fully tested, also tested on over 1,000 women. Has no contraindications. It's totally safe, but it's also, as I said, not a healthcare product. Also, pregnant women do use sexual toys. It is being sold according to the country where it's sold at a cost of 120 euros. We kept on developing these devices during the preliminary studies. In fact, the devices had a battery which a lot bigger and much more complex and hard or difficult to use. But once we finished with our preliminary studies, we thought, or we passed on our technology to this other company, because we want for all patients to have the option to opt for using it during their pregnancy. And as you can see, the final product is a small device, a very user-friendly device that's to be used with any mobile phone. And besides what Dr. Lopez has said, with other ID products, we believe that it is essential that all pregnant women can decide if they want to start communicating in an efficient manner with their baby, and above all, if they want to stimulate the circuits of communication for the hearing and for their fetus. So we did the study, and we wanted for this to be on the market for all patients to have access to this product. Have you seen what happens if the mother sings to the baby, not the device? Yes. So far, the baby doesn't care, doesn't mind. I think with everything I have published, whether the fetus recognizes the mother's voice, etc., will be able to do so now, and without meaning to criticize anybody. If the fetus moved its head towards the sound that he was hearing, but the sound came to the fetus in a very distant and distorted way. And before it used to be distorted, but now we'll be able to raise the question to the children whom their mothers will have spoken to. You said that this can be used by mothers to check whether the fetus is fine. Can they feel the movement? In truth, one of the people who checked the article raised this question, and we were happily surprised. And there are some guidelines in the Royal College of Gynecologists and Obstetrics, guidelines for pregnant women, physicians, etc., to check the fetus movements. And this device does not only generate specific movements, but is also able in 90% of the fetus where we apply it to. There's a 90% response of general movements, and it's important for patients that are under 25 weeks of pregnancy, because there's no control of the movements, to reduce their anxiety and also reduce the number of emergency visits, and this perhaps can cause a stimuli at home. The mother, of course, will not feel if the baby is moving its mouth, but it will feel that it is moving. This would avoid. This, of course, wouldn't be applicable to an urgent medical matter. if the women are 32 weeks pregnant, if there's a problem, of course they have to go to a hospital or a healthcare center. Also, if driving and using the device, then of course the mother gets crazy. I think the patient in her household can do the test. If there is movement, fine, but if there is no movement, this doesn't mean there is a problem. Also, at 22 weeks of pregnancy, an urgent medical action would not solve any problem at that stage. Is there a maximum of decibels to be used? What has happened to the babies where they have used the device with the unborn children? The first part of the question, there's a membrane inside, and it has a limit plug to 54 decibels, and this is for the mother to use it at the intensity that the mother wants, but the fetus will only receive 54 decibels. Yes, it is difficult to carry out studies, or perhaps it would be too ambitious if we want to study everything. Tomatis was saying that stimulation with music and Mozart was useful for everything, and said it was frightening. He also says that if children have dyslexia, have a laterality, have communication problems, is dependent upon an inadequate development during pregnancy. If this was the case, we can correct it and reduce the number of children born with dyslexia. I think this is too ambitious, but what it is clear to me, having said that, when we see an adopted child, 7 months old, the stimulation it receives, or if there's a child where it hasn't been talked to or played music to, is not the same as one that has had this stimulation. If we can stimulate its language and development before it is born, then ... I wouldn't dare to say more than that. Good morning, and thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. I'm a pediatrician and a neonatologist. I have been dealing with maybe many premature babies. What I'd like to say is more a comment rather than a question. I have been trained in a neonatal behavioral scale called NICTA, and it goes from the baby to the premature babies. When watching premature babies, is that in general terms, any type of stimulation, sensory stimulation for a baby that was born before its term, is no good. It is better for the baby to be in a dark, quiet environment, and we have noticed, we have seen that the children after develop communication or problems with language, and the studies carried out with premature children or babies are not conclusive. It is unclear. Is it a good thing if a premature birth, 28, 29 weeks old, has music? Perhaps the sound of the mother or the father, like in the pouch, maybe is positive for its development. And I'm worried that perhaps without control, one thing is for you, a specialist, doing it during these applications, but one at home to do it at home. Yes, but this can be done abdominally. But via the abdomen, this is 30 decibels we're talking about. I'm worried because I'm not sure about anything. I don't know. At least now we have the option to be able to study it, and in that sense there is a massive application of from the patients themselves via the abdomen, and we sadly don't think they can reach the objective aimed by the mother. And in that sense, it would be fantastic to carry out a postnatal study to planify what could be the follow-up of these babies, of such babies. And I think that early stimulation, as long as it doesn't mean it's noise, or as long as the sleep patterns are respected, we're talking about an intensity of 50 decibels. The circadian cycles are not developed until 28-30 weeks of pregnancy. Before that, they are much shorter. There is no sound or REM sleep before that. First, the sounds are developed from the cochlea to the outside. First, deep sounds, then high pitched, and it's very good that this is more looked into in depth. But if it reaches the masses of people, Dr. Riverola, I know you, and I know you're a great professional. It's an honor for you to be with us. If you're worried that for the fact that fetus listen to music is not good for the fetus, why haven't you told your patients? Why don't you tell your patients not to use the rubbers? The fetus don't hear it. This is what we've just said here. You thought they did listen to music, they did hear the music, but please go out and tell them not to use that. It's not the same when we talk about noise or music. Incubators of the best hospitals all have music, all of them. All of them. Music? Yes. All incubators do. All hospitals and clinics. They have, if you want to have a look at this clinic, it is not approved. We don't use music, we don't play music. We believe it's good, and if it was bad, it wouldn't be used. We wouldn't be playing music. We use music when they've come to term. No, I'm talking about incubators to women of late intrauterine development. We know that it stimulates the cerebral circulation, and I have to learn so much about this. The fetus have a perfect hearing, but the walls of the mother do muffle the high-pitched tones. This is something that we have discovered. There's no difference between low and high-pitched tones. This would be to clarify. I'm not sure if I've understood it correctly. Did you say that the fetus does not respond to the voice of the mother? Yes, exactly so. When a pregnant woman has undergone a scan, when the mother speaks to its baby, to its fetus, or when the mother shouts, there's no reaction. If she shouts, there's no movement. This is what we've said with this study, that when the mother speaks, the fetus hears it as a whisper, as a muffled sound. The conscious side, perhaps the subconscious does. I'm not getting into that, but the conscious side of the unborn baby doesn't hear it. What does it mean for the 23% of the unborn babies that don't react, that don't move? Does it mean that No, if you take a baby, and you speak to the baby, oh, look at you, and doesn't pay attention. If he does pay attention to you, it's because he's hungry or he wants to have a poo-poo. But now we can discard the fact, if there is a response, we can discard the fact that there's unborn deafness. For all those that have deafness risk, we have done the tests and we haven't found it. In that sense, although it's not part of this study, it is true that with Professor Bernald, we have asked for patients to come consecutively 2-3 times, and even postnatally, the diagnosis of the hearing loss cannot be diagnosed on the day the baby is born. That doesn't occur on the first day, and even so less during pregnancy. We don't aim at saying that during pregnancy we have a test that is specific to the deafness diagnosis. But we do believe it's a very interesting line of research, and with that create our specific testing on deafness, potentially deaf babies. But we cannot test the deafness when the baby is born. If there is a response with a specific vocalization movements and the baby does it during the time of simulation, this means there is hearing, but we cannot determine if there is a certain degree of deafness. Also, the baby responds or doesn't respond depending on what occurs outside. With 90% of twins, as part of the study, the twins respond in the same manner. They either don't respond, or both move, or both protrude their tongues, etc. Perhaps the blood sugar levels or the sleep levels are the same or are similar. I don't think you can find it in chemists. I think they sell it online. It's under the name of Baby Pot. I don't know where it's sold. It's a different company. I have studied a lot, but I've never read an article that says that music could not be beneficial. I've never heard that. If that was the case, I'd like for that publication to be sent to me. Music, in certain cases, has been proven that doesn't achieve the benefits that one aims at, but that it has been non-beneficial, never. But before this was put on for sale, it should be certified. It's not a healthcare product. It does have all guarantees. You can have peace of mind. Some more questions? The music could not have a specific benefit or effect, but be harmful. No. A question for Dr. Pratt. Why do we have these response circuits to music? There is a theory that was that said in the early 90s that not only human beings but also a great part of vertebrates have very primitive neurological circuits that are related to communication. So what we have found is locate the hardware. Perhaps those circuits get activated because there's a sound, or spontaneously we have a certain amount of mouth or tongue movements, and those circuits are related to communication, and these circuits can be activated thanks to this methodology. If no more questions are raised, then we will close this press conference because a lot of you will have to leave. Thank you very much for coming. A pleasure to having seen you all in our house here, and I hope this is helpful for you. Thank you.
Bueno, muy bien, ¿no? Muy bien. Muy bien. Y ya conviene que salieran cosas de eso. Va muy bien.
Sí, y tal. Y ahora mismo tengo una entrevista.
Sí, hacemos eso. Va muy bien.
Sí, y tal. Y ahora mismo tengo una entrevista.
Sí, hacemos eso. Va muy bien.
Sí, y tal. Y ahora mismo tengo una entrevista.
Sí, hacemos eso.